Hello, friends, and welcome to the PrepWell podcast. I'm your host, Phil Black. And if you have an 8th, 9th, or 10th grader with big aspirations, like the Ivy League, or military service academies like West Point, ROTC, or athletic scholarships, boom, you've come to the right place. My specialty, my superpower, if you will, is preparing families for these competitive programs. I'll teach you what your child should do, when they should do it, and how you can help. So stick around and prepare to out-prepare. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the PrepWell podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to break down the admissions policy known as early decision, because it's a hot topic nowadays. There's a lot of chatter out there about it. I sense there's some confusion and a yearning for some direction on how to handle this, both from parents and students. So today we will look at, number one, why colleges seem to love early decision applicants. And number two, if so, should you try to take advantage of this phenomenon or this trend? And right off the bat, let's cover timeline and terminology. And yes, I will be generalizing for convenience here. Not every college and university will abide by these same timelines and these same policies for that matter, but it's going to be close. I just want to make sure that you have a general idea of when this stuff starts happening. Now, this is going to be particularly relevant for, of course, juniors now, because they're going to be bumping up against this just in a few months. And of course, sophomores, because they need a little heads up on how this all works a little bit further down the road. Let's start out with time of year. Most early deadlines, including early decision, are November 1st of senior year. November 1st of senior year. Just get your orientation here, which means very little, if any, of senior year activities and grades and accomplishments will actually be captured on the application. I've talked about this in many podcasts and in many blogs, so just to give you a heads up. Number two, let's talk about the differences in early admissions options. There's a lot of semantics and a little bit of jargon in here that I want to make sure everybody's clear on. Let's start with the scariest option of all. That's what we're going to focus on today. It's called early decision, or ED. That's the one where, if accepted, you must attend that school. It's a binding contract, no matter what kind of financial aid package you might be offered, which could be a lot, could be some, it could be none. It doesn't matter. With ED, early decision, you must go. And yes, you must immediately pull back all of the other applications that you may have submitted in the meantime. It's over. You're in and you're going. Now, presumably, if this is your dream school and you can afford it, you're stoked. This is what you've always wanted. And yes, there are a few exceptions to this rule, particularly with, oh, can I get out of my financial obligation? I've heard that it's possible. What should I do? Please don't go into an ED situation, an early decision situation, planning on being the exception because you heard it happened, it worked out well for somebody. Somehow you'd be the one that they will release from their financial obligations. Please do not count on that. It's not something you want to mess around with. The bottom line is most students who apply ED are ready and willing to pay whatever the college asks of them, period. Okay, so that's early decision. Another flavor of early is restricted early action, REA, restricted early action. This is for schools like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and a few others who don't require you to commit if you're accepted early, but they also don't allow you to apply early to other private colleges. You can apply to other schools' regular decision, but just not early. So it's not quite as harsh as early decision because you don't have to go, but you can't just willy-nilly apply any old place early. You have to only apply to their school and not apply to other private schools early. So there's a little edge there. Lastly, we have early action. That's probably the most common one, EA. And you can apply to as many EA schools as you like, unlike with restricted early action where you can only apply to one private school early. With early action, you're not restricted. You can wait to hear back from all these schools that you applied to early. You can compare their financial aid packages. You can wait to see where you get in regular decision and then make your ultimate decision. So early action, or EA, gives you an early read on where you're getting in, but also gives you maximum freedom in terms of deciding where you ultimately want to go. And there are a few other variants in the early admissions policy world. I don't want to get bogged down in ED2 and ED3. Let's stick with the basics for now. So we're going to move on from early admissions and we're going to move on to regular admissions. Most regular admissions deadlines are January 1st. Again, yes, there are some exceptions. I just want to give you the big picture, make sure you have those dates in your mind. So in review, generally speaking, early deadlines in all forms are November 1st of senior year, and regular deadlines are January 1st of senior year. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. So here's the question. Why is the differential rate for early decision admits often 3 to 5 times greater than those for regular admits? Why do 3 to 5 times more early decision applicants get in versus regular decision applicants? Well, a few reasons, not the least of which is the fact that colleges benefit greatly from having an ED option, an early decision option. So how is it and why is it that colleges benefit from offering an early decision option? Well, number one, it spreads the load for their admissions readers. Instead of having to review every single application between January and March, they spread it out a little bit. They add a few more months to the front end and spread out the workload for all of their readers. Now, this benefit applies to early action and restricted early action as well, so this is not something specific to early decision, but it is a benefit to the college. Number two, students who apply early decision often have the financial resources to pay for the school. In other words, if money is not a factor, there's less downside in applying ED, at least from a financial perspective. You'll pay whatever they say. What this means is that ED applicants often come from wealthier families that are more than willing to pay full freight to attend the schools. It's not every applicant, of course. Now, sometimes there's a wall separating financial aid and admissions. So sometimes admissions doesn't know which applicants are quote unquote full payers or not. But the odds are that if a child applies ED, that the family is ready to pay up, certainly compared to families applying regular decision, who will want to negotiate financial aid packages and compare schools with one another. So that gives them some transparency into what types of students are applying from a financial perspective. Number three, another big advantage is that colleges can use this pool of students who are typically well-organized and well-prepared and have money to please multiple constituencies all in one shot. This may include athletic coaches, college faculty, the development office, important alumni, politicians, the financial aid office. They get representation from different states and countries, and they hit their racial diversity mandates and gender ratios. Different academic departments want their students, music, physics, whatever it might be. All of these people are watching. And to the extent that the admissions office can knock out a lot of these demands early, it makes their job easier down the road. They want to lock in students and please as many constituencies as possible. Number four, early decision guarantees the base of a college's yield rate. Think about it. If a college accepts 900 students early decision, and all 900 are contractually obligated to attend, that's a 100% yield rate, meaning every person who is admitted actually attends. This can really help out with a school's overall yield rate, which of course is also influenced by what happens in the regular decision rounds. But man, that solid base of 100% of early decision applicants can certainly give that overall yield a boost down the road. Number 5, early decision also helps financial aid offices model their financial needs. If they accept 900 students ED, they know what those families have been obligated to pay, so they can plan more easily for when the regular decision round hits. They have a lot more information to work with. And number 6, along those lines, if a college can lock in a lot of their precious students early and then open the floodgates in the regular decision round and get as many applicants as possible and deny most of them, it then appears as if they're super selective, which makes them look more prestigious, which moves them up the rankings, which then makes even more students want to apply. And finally, the truth is, early decision applicants are usually, not always, but usually very strong performers who would be highly sought at any number of other highly selective institutions. Why is that the case? Well, as we'll see here in a second, students who are able to get all of their ducks in a row, including their financial ducks, within the first month or so of senior year, they're usually way ahead of the curve. So what types of students typically apply early decision? Remember, because these terms can sometimes sound interchangeable at times, it's important to be specific. We're talking about early decision. That's different from early action. We're talking about the one where it's mandatory to go if you get accepted. The pool of students who typically do this, first off, they come from more well-to-do families and environments, as we've talked about. Number 2, they normally have the ability to pay whatever the colleges say they should. Because remember, there's no negotiating or comparing with other financial packages. You get what you get. Number 3, they typically have parents who have been to college, who understand the benefits of getting ready early, who are engaged early in the process. That's part of the deal. Number 4, their peers at school talk about what ED means. They talk about it in the hallways. They talk about it in the locker rooms. These days, maybe they talk about it in chat rooms or on Zoom calls. So their awareness is high about that. Number 5, these students are normally more organized. Number 6, they have access to programs like PrepWell Academy, or they hire someone like me or another private college counselor who gives them the heads up on these types of things. Number 7, their parents are aware of the financial aid forms like FAFSA and CSS Profile, and they're able to submit those in time by November 1st. Number 8, many students who apply ED have guidance counselors who may give them the inside scoop on this. Number 9, they may come from private schools who put a ton of resources behind dedicated college counselors who are embedded in the school who share this type of information. Number 10, many students have had access to private tutors that help them get prepared for the SAT and the ACT early. Number 11, many have had the time and the money to visit colleges well in advance so that they're comfortable with making such a big decision because they've been there. Number 12, many have had the foresight to complete their essays and their whole application for that matter in time. 13, many of these students have gotten such good advice and prepared so early and so well, like many of you who are in PrepWell Academy, that they front-loaded all their significant activities, their leadership roles, their standardized tests, so that they don't really need any part of 12th grade to beef up their credentials. They're already there. Number 14, they were told, as I advise students in the beginning of junior year, and of course we have many lessons on this in PrepWell Academy, to be ready to ask for teacher letters of recommendation at the end of junior year and not to wait until senior year when teachers get inundated with requests for letters of recommendation, and sometimes they can't get them done in time for somebody who wants to apply early. Number 15, some of these people who apply early decision are athletes who are typically forced to apply early after being vetted by the admissions department ahead of time, and the coach basically tells them you must apply early. Now, that's a pretty detailed and a pretty long list. The best, and usually most expensive, private schools know about all this stuff because their pitch to parents is that they will position their kids to get into the most selective colleges when the time comes. And that's part of the reason why parents are paying so much money to send them to the private school, so the theory goes. And by getting these students prepared to apply ED, the private schools are increasing the chances of delivering on that implicit promise. So imagine if you're a public school kid who maybe gets little bits and pieces of this information, or maybe none of this information. How do you think that student's going to stack up against the private school student who's been training for this for years? That's why so many families have flocked to PrepWell Academy. Because I give your child and you, the parent, all of these juicy bits every single week. I bring you over the wall and share all of these strategies and tactics, starting when it matters most, as we all know, in 9th and 10th grade. It's one of the few ways that students who are not at private schools that focus on college prep can compete. And I'm happy to give those kids a fighting chance who don't have all those resources. So what do I tell a student who asks about applying ED? Well, that's a tough question because, as we know, there's a lot of different variables. I will say that I have advised students on occasion that their only shot at getting into a particular school would probably be in the early decision round. Well, why is that the case? Well, because in my assessment, their package may not be strong enough to hold up against the regular decision pool. They may have to take their chances applying ED because applying ED is the biggest demonstration of interest a student can give to a school, especially if you're a full payer. But please don't misinterpret this. This does not mean that if you have a subpar application, that it always makes sense to apply early decision because your chances are going to be higher because that's what the numbers say. That's not necessarily true. But if you're close, and especially if you're close and a full payer, meaning that you're not applying for any need-based financial aid, there's hardly a better way to demonstrate strong interest in a school than by applying ED, early decision. Now, the dirty little secret is, obviously, that not everyone who applies ED gets in. Think about it. There are over 50,000 high schools in the United States, public and private. And if each one of those schools had both a valedictorian and a salutatorian, in other words, the number 1 and the number 2 graduate in each high school, that's 100,000 students who most would consider extremely qualified. And we all know that there are nowhere near 100,000 openings for students in the ED rounds. And we're not even taking into account any of the hundreds of tens of thousands of other students who are not valedictorians or salutatorians, but have other incredible things going for them. So when you start to look at the numbers, it really gets crazy. So you can't count on getting in ED because you're a competitive person, a competitive applicant, but maybe it bumps your chances up a little bit. That's the devil's in the details there. So let me try to end up here by giving you something you can get your arms around. Now, the caveat here is that I have no idea what your child's particular qualifications are. So please take this advice with a grain of salt. And if you still have questions, reach out to me for a consult, catch up in our office hours if you'd like more specific guidance, because, again, this is hard to generalize. However, your child should consider applying early decision to a college or a university if, number 1, they are a recruited athlete supported by admissions and the coach tells them they have to apply early. That seems like an obvious one. Number 2, you as a family can comfortably afford the college if your child gets in. And or you would not be relying on an unreasonably favorable financial aid award. Number 3, speaking of financial aid, you should be prepared to complete whatever financial aid forms will be required for the school by the deadline. That's typically the FAFSA and the CSS profile, which is normally November 1st. Number 4, it's your child's number 1 choice by a long shot, and there's no other place on earth that they'd rather go. If they got in, there'd be no regrets, no doubts. They're ready to rock and roll. Number 5, you visited the campus, maybe even multiple times, and spent significant time there, enough to get a real feel for whether this is the perfect fit or not just a drive-by. Because again, this is going to be official if they get in. Number 6, your child is so far ahead of the curve in terms of preparation, like most serious PrepWellers are, that they don't need senior year to bolster their body of work. They've done everything well ahead of time. They've taken the rigorous classes. They've done great things over the summer. They have a great SAT or ACT score in the bag. They've written compelling essays that have been reviewed and proofread. Their teachers wrote letters of recommendation over the summer. And basically, they have a bulletproof application with no gaps. And all of this is done by October of their senior year. So basically, most, if not all of this work is done during the summer before their senior year. Number 7, they're extremely well qualified given the rest of the applicant pool. In other words, when it comes to standardized testing, for instance, they should probably be at a minimum in the top 25% of typical student scores. Remember, don't think that applying to a college early that's out of your reach will necessarily overcome big gaps in your application. It probably won't. You still have to be very realistic and humble, no matter how competitive your application is. And number 8, remember, even if you've checked off all of the boxes and more, you should still not expect to get into some of the most highly selective colleges. Not because you're not worthy, not because you missed something, you're not a good person, but because it's a numbers game and there are only so many beds to go around. Now, on the flip side, why you should not apply early decision: 1, just because the admissions rate is higher. Number 2, because all of your friends are applying ED somewhere and you want to fit in. Number 3, because your grades aren't strong enough to compete in the regular decision pool and you think there's going to be a bump to applying early. The 4th reason why you should not apply ED is because your parents want you to go, even though you're not sure if it's your number 1 choice. The 5th reason you should not apply ED is if you can't afford it. The 6th reason is if your application isn't 100% ready to go. If you had to rush any part of it and it's not your best work, don't bother applying. Number 7, if you can't get your financial aid forms in time, don't bother applying. I know this is a lot to digest. There's a lot of terminology here. I hope I did a good job breaking this down. I hope this has given you plenty to think about, especially for those juniors and those up-and-coming sophomores who are thinking about applying early decision somewhere. You're trying to do this mental calculations, and I wish you all luck. For all of you who are in PrepWell Academy, this is why you listen to my videos every week, so that you can prepare yourself ahead of time to make these types of decisions. And if you're not yet a PrepWeller, please enroll so you too can get the inside scoop on how all this stuff works. That's all I've got for you today, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the continued support. If you know a parent with an 8th grader, 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader in high school that might find this helpful, please share this episode with them. You can do that by finding that small box. It's got a little tiny arrow pointing up. That's the share button. Click that share button. Text your friends the link to this episode. Put a little note in there from you recommending that they listen to it. If you have questions, comments, if you have an idea for an upcoming episode, please reach out to me by email, DM me on Instagram, check out our blog, Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. Till next week, goodbye, good luck, and never stop preparing. This podcast is brought to you by PrepWell Academy. PrepWell Academy is my one-of-a-kind online mentoring program that delivers to your 9th or 10th grader a short, highly relevant video from me every week, every Sunday, in fact, where I give them a heads up about what they should be thinking about to stay ahead of the game. To get these valuable lessons into your child's hands, please head over to PrepWellAcademy.com and enroll your child today.